There are voices in this world that don't just sing, they heal. Pastor Shirley Caesar had one of those voices. A voice filled with power, hope, and deep faith. For decades, she stood on stage, lifting others out of pain with her music. People saw her as strong, unshakable, and full of God's light. But what most people never saw was the storm she was hiding behind her smile. This is not the story of a celebrity or a gospel legend. This is the story of a woman who gave everything to others, until one heartbreaking moment forced her to face her deepest fears alone. What happened behind closed doors changed her life forever, and once you know her story, it will stay with you for a long, long time. Shirley Caesar didn't come from riches or fame. She was born in a small, struggling neighborhood, in a home filled with love but little else. Her father was a hardworking man who did whatever he could to provide, but life had other plans. When Shirley was just 7 years old, she lost her father, a moment that changed everything. At an age when most children are still learning how to dream, she was already learning how to survive. Her mother, a woman of deep faith, refused to give in to the weight of loss. Every night, she would gather her children around and lead them in prayer. She used to say, "When the world breaks you, only faith can hold you together." It was during one of those quiet evenings that Shirley discovered her gift, a voice that could move hearts and calm storms. She began singing in her local church, where her voice didn't just echo, it stayed with people. Before long, her talent caught the attention of local gospel groups. One invitation led to another, until finally, she was asked to sing with the Caravans, one of the most well-known gospel groups at the time. Shirley was still so young, but when she opened her mouth to sing, people listened, not just to her notes, but to her soul. Fame began to follow. Crowds came in larger numbers, her name was whispered in church halls and shouted from radio stations. But at her core, Shirley was still that little girl who had lost her father, still carrying a fire in her chest and her mother's prayers in her heart. Her rise felt unstoppable. But what no one knew was that the higher she climbed, the more the weight of her past would begin to pull at her. And the story that was unfolding behind the curtain was one that would test everything she believed in. As Shirley's name grew, so did the weight on her shoulders. She became a national voice of hope, traveling from city to city, singing in packed churches and stadiums, touching thousands of lives. But behind the applause and the stage lights, she was growing tired, not just in her body, but in her soul. She missed birthdays, family dinners, quiet mornings. The woman who gave peace to others barely had any left for herself. Her life became a cycle of flights, hotel rooms, and sound checks. Even in marriage, her time was not hers. Her husband, though supportive and loving, often found himself sitting alone in the front row, proud but aching. There were times when Shirley would stand in front of a crowd and smile, only to return to her dressing room and cry. Not because she was ungrateful, but because she was empty. She had become a healer to the world, but in the process forgot to care for her own heart. She once wrote in her journal, "People say I'm strong because I sing about faith, but sometimes even I need someone to sing for me." This was the cost of her calling, and slowly it began to catch up with her. It was supposed to be just another tour, another night, another stage, another city singing praises. But one phone call changed everything. Shirley was in the middle of a sound check when she got the news. Her husband had collapsed at home. His breathing was shallow. He was being rushed to the hospital. She dropped everything and flew back home, her heart pounding with fear, her mind praying that this was just a scare. But when she reached the hospital, the look in the doctor's eyes told her more than words ever could. Her husband had been diagnosed with a rare heart condition, one that had gone undetected for years, one that doctors said was serious and unpredictable. Shirley stayed by his side for weeks, putting her entire career on pause. For a woman who had always been strong for others, she now found herself trembling at night, praying for strength she didn't know if she had left. Her husband, though weak, always smiled when she walked in. "God's got us," he would whisper, and she wanted to believe him. She tried. But slowly, his condition worsened. And one cold evening, as rain tapped gently on the hospital window, he took her hand and quietly slipped away. No final words, just a silence so deep it echoed louder than any song she had ever sung. In that moment, Shirley didn't feel like a pastor or a gospel singer. She just felt like a woman who had lost the one person who saw her, a woman who had sung about healing all her life, now unable to heal her own heart. The world mourned with her, but no one truly knew the weight of that loss. Behind every tribute and every headline, she was just trying to breathe again. After the funeral, the lights dimmed, the phone stopped ringing. The world moved on, but Shirley couldn't. She vanished from the spotlight without a word. No concerts, no interviews, no recordings, just silence. For the first time in decades, she wasn't on a stage. She was in her home, alone with her grief. The same voice that had once lifted thousands now refused to rise. She found herself staring at old photographs, replaying memories, clinging to pieces of the past that slipped through her fingers, no matter how tightly she held on. Mornings felt heavy, nights felt endless. She would sit by the window, watching the sunrise, wondering if she would ever feel whole again. The grief wasn't just emotional, it was spiritual. For a woman who had built her life on faith, she now felt distant from the very God she had spent her life singing about. She didn't feel angry, but she did feel abandoned. She stopped going to church. She stopped opening her Bible. The silence in her home began to sound like silence from heaven. One day, months later, she walked into the small church where she first began singing as a child. The pews were empty. The lights were off. She sat down in the back row and let the stillness surround her. And then, in that deep, painful quiet, a memory came to her, her mother's voice saying, "When the world breaks you, only faith can hold you together." She didn't cry, she didn't speak, but she closed her eyes, and for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel alone. After the funeral, Shirley didn't return to the stage. She didn't return to the studio. She didn't return to life as people knew it. Instead, she quietly disappeared. The woman who once stood before thousands, full of strength and fire, now spent her days inside a quiet house filled with memories. Every corner reminded her of him, his chair, his books, the soft hum of the gospel, records they used to play on Sunday mornings. But now, the music had stopped. In those first few weeks, people tried to reach out. Calls came in, cards arrived, but Shirley wasn't ready. She didn't want comfort. She wanted to feel the pain, fully, because pretending it wasn't there felt like dishonoring the love she had lost. She turned down invitations. She ignored interview requests. She let the world go on without her. For the first time in her life, she didn't have the energy to perform, not just on stage, but in life. Her mornings became slow and quiet. She would sit by the window with a cup of tea that would go cold in her hands. Hours would pass as she stared into nothing, lost in memories. At night, she would lie awake, sometimes talking to God, sometimes just to herself. Why him? Why now? Why me? But the only answer was silence, and in that silence, her faith began to shake. She felt something she had never felt before, distance from God. For a woman who had spent her entire life preaching and singing about trust, this feeling terrified her. She didn't feel angry, just empty. She had spent decades telling others that God was close to the brokenhearted. But now, in her own heartbreak, she couldn't feel that closeness. Her Bible stayed on the shelf, untouched. The piano in the corner, the same one she had written so many songs on, stayed closed, collecting dust. Her voice, once so powerful, now trembled even in prayer. Some days she didn't speak at all. Grief had taken her words. Then, one rainy afternoon, months after she had stepped away from everything, Shirley found herself walking back to the small church where her journey began. It was empty, no choir, no organ, no lights. just wooden pews and silence. She walked slowly down the aisle and sat in the very back, her hands folded, her heart heavy. For a long time, she said nothing. She just sat there, letting the quiet wrap around her. It was in that stillness that something began to shift. A memory came to her, her mother's voice, gentle and strong. When the world breaks you, only faith can hold you together. She didn't cry, she didn't smile, but something inside her moved. It wasn't healing, not yet, but it was the first step. She wasn't sure what would come next, but for the first time in a long while, she felt like maybe she wasn't completely alone. Healing didn't come overnight. It didn't come through a song or a sermon or a single moment of revelation. It came in pieces, slow, quiet, almost invisible. At first, it was just her humming to herself while washing dishes. Then, one morning, she picked up her Bible and read a verse, not out of habit, but out of need. Not for performance, but for comfort. She started visiting church again, sitting quietly in the back, not as a guest speaker, not as Pastor Shirley Caesar,